Clearly one of the best investments I've ever been involved in.
Just get the damn vaccine.
Welcome. We're so thankful that you've tuned in for this global premiere of The Truth About Vaccines Presents Remedy. I'm Charlene Bollinger, and this is my husband, Ty, and we're your hosts. You may recognize us from previous docuseries that we produced in the past.
The past few years have been crazy, haven't they? Like being on a roller coaster at times, not knowing when you're going to be dropped down the next steep hill of government tyranny and mask or vaccine mandates. Millions of people have been injured from vaccines. Not even the CDC disagrees with this assertion. They openly publish vaccine injuries on their VAERS database, which is on their own website. We'll talk about VAERS in a while, but first of all, why did we produce Remedy?
Honestly, this is the documentary we had to create because what we really need today are answers and remedies to the problems created by some medical interventions like vaccines, as well as solutions to the myriad of other problems created by the medical system, Big Pharma, and the government.
So over the next 8 days, we're going to cover as many alternatives as we can fit into the 8 episodes. So put on your seatbelt and get ready. Just so you can know what to expect, each episode will focus on different vaccines, and each episode will contain different remedies. And keep in mind that the recurring theme of this docuseries when it comes to a tyrannical government or an overarching dictator figure who attempts to coerce you into violating your conscience or your bodily integrity is just say no.
With all the insanity happening across the globe, what the world needs today is hope, and that's what we're here to give you in Remedy. But before we give you answers to the problems, and before we can counter the lies with the truth, let's take a trip to the past and learn a bit about history to understand why this documentary is needed, shall we?
If we look back in history, we'll see that people like the Italian astronomer and physicist Galileo, he was convicted in 1633 for publishing his evidence that supported Copernican theory, or the sun-centered theory, that says the Earth actually revolves around the sun, which we know it does. Galileo was mocked and he was called a heretic for his anti-scientific views, and he was sentenced to house arrest, where he remained for the rest of his life. And he was excommunicated from the Catholic Church. He was later proven to be telling the truth.
Throughout history, the truth tellers of science were actually the ones who were mocked or called quacks or ostracized from society. And they turned out to be the ones that simply had the courage to tell the truth, as we are telling it now. The vaccine industry is a criminal cartel. Their products don't work as they claim. They're not as safe as they claim, and they harm and kill millions of people every year all around the world.
Vaccinology is an interesting word. I do believe it applies because that's what it is. It implies that you are all in or all out. You are part of the group or you're not. It's a multi-generational indoctrination of safe and effective, and this is what we do, and we just inject our children because we have to give them this shot so they will not contract these particular infections. And to me, it's more like a cult. And meaning a cult that either you go along with the program or you're excommunicated from the program. This is the schedule. This is how we give it. And you have to give them all at the same time, or we're going to call it vaccine hesitancy, and that you're refusing vaccination, and that you're being a difficult patient. And if you don't do it all at the same time, we're going to discharge you from our practice. That's a cult.
If you look at the definition of a cult, you look at, you need full adherence to an ideology in a cult, aggressive adherence, It's an us versus them mentality. They're always looking to recruit new people rapidly. You have to do, it's usually these radical rituals that you have to do to be in the cult, to show allegiance to the cult. And I couldn't think of a more radical ritual than giving several untested injectable pharmaceutical products from criminal pharmaceutical companies to children.
In a combination civil and criminal settlement, Pfizer has agreed to pay $2.3 billion, the largest healthcare fraud settlement in the history of the Department of Justice.
You have to overlook the bad behavior of your leader, of a leader, in order to show adherence to the cult, because it's for the greater good. There's also little mantras that are used. Greater good.
We have to start doing things for the greater good of society.
See that its benefits outweigh the risk of this cult. You see people that believe one thing or will say one thing one day and then change that the next day. That's called gaslighting, and we saw plenty of that during COVID-19. That's also a very prominent profile of a cult, is a constant gaslighting of people to tell them what truth is.
Gaslighting. Now, that's exactly what's been happening with vaccines, isn't it?
If we look at recent history, those of us, including world-renowned scientists and virologists, who warned about the potential adverse effects from the COVID-19 injections, we were called conspiracy theorists, and we were slandered and maligned. We were censored, kicked off social media, we had YouTube accounts deleted, and we were viciously attacked by the mainstream media attack dogs.
We have now been proven correct. Myocarditis and other heart issues are exploding. Cancer is rampant. Sudden deaths are happening every day. But the mainstream media is censoring these stories.
I'm disturbed that the multiple press stories are trying to grasp at straws, anything that they think they can associate with sudden death, to distract Americans away from the real cause of sudden death, which is COVID-19 vaccination.
Despite the mainstream media's efforts to distract and obfuscate the truth, blaming the deaths and the heart attacks and the strokes on solar storms and breathing too much and eating too many eggs and daylight savings time and even video games, everybody knows that the vaccine is devastating and the injuries being caused by these vaccines are real.
The truth is that the BBC and other trusted news initiative outlets are responsible for the millions of excess deaths caused by the COVID-19 injections.
In the USA alone in 2021, nearly 700,000 excess deaths occurred. That might have been prevented if it weren't for censorship by the mainstream media. By the end of 2022, that figure had ballooned to 1.25 million excess deaths. Sadly, but quite clearly, the purpose behind this ministry of truth is to keep a lid on the spread of life-saving knowledge online. All information must first pass through the censorship filters established by the mainstream media before it reaches your eyes and ears. This is a coordinated effort between Big Pharma, the media, and the medical establishment to make sure that you only have access to their version of the truth, which is, in fact, a lie.
Modern medicine really functions like a mafia, and they've bought off most of the mainstream media. How many programs have you seen that say sponsored by Pfizer, brought to you by Pfizer? Programs about COVID, about vaccines, about health and medicine in general. So much of it is paid for by Pfizer. Well, these media companies are just taking money to push propaganda that benefits the bottom line of Pfizer. This is payola. It's illegal in most industries. It should be illegal in media and pharma. And yet somehow this is tolerated. It's just straight up bribery, it's kickbacks, it's fraud. These are falsehoods that the media are pushing about these vaccines and their safety or efficacy profiles. In any other industry, the FTC would crack down on this and say, no, you're committing fraud. You're lying to the public and you're getting paid to do it. That's bribery and fraud. These are felony crimes that are being carried out every day by the media, the big pharma cartels, and the regulators in government. They are a criminal operation. They know exactly what they're doing. And they won't stop unless we bring them to justice through the courts.
Mike's absolutely right. Bring them to justice in the courts. That's why we are suing the Trusted News Initiative. And we will win because they blatantly tried to silence our voices by creating a news cartel.
The Trusted News Initiative was launched originally by BBC, the British Broadcasting Company, which itself has ties with the British intelligence agencies. And the BBC brought together a lot of the legacy news organizations, including the Washington Post, Reuters, AP, Associated Press, and then the social media giants like Microsoft, Google, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all of those groups, and they agreed on harmonize their reporting about the pandemic and about other issues, including issues that were related to the US election, like the Hunter Biden laptop. They agreed to not allow reporting that legitimized dissenting opinions, like anything about COVID had to be consistent with what WHO and CDC's policies were. And they made a secret agreement. They all met. We believe that it violated the antitrust laws as well as the First Amendment. They agreed not only to censor the news themselves, but to deplatform any rival news organization that tried to report dissenting opinions. They made this deal with the social media platforms that if any of those rival news organizations printed or published information that was contrary to official protocols, for example, testimony by doctors that they were treating patients successfully with ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, testimony of mothers who lost children to vaccines, testimony of individuals who were injured by vaccines, testimony of people who said that the vaccines would not prevent transmission, information that made it look like the virus may have been bioengineered or that it may have come from the Wuhan lab. That was all forbidden information. And if a rival news organization printed that information, that rival news organization would be throttled or deplatformed or shadow banned on the social media sites. Their role is to speak truth to power. But that's not what they were doing. They were doing the opposite of that. They were broadcasting propaganda of the powerful and crushing the little guy and the dissenting voices who tried to voice a different version that was inconsistent with official proclamations and orthodoxies.
Scientists and experts were effectively silenced, and any research or findings that didn't align with the official narrative on COVID-19 was dismissed as fake news and conspiracy theory. Meanwhile, Big Pharma and those atop the medical profession and their cronies in the mainstream media lied over and over and over to the people about the COVID-19 injections.
The lies that are permeated by the medical profession and the pharmaceutical industry and our federal health agencies around the entire world are gross, disgusting, and evil, in my opinion. And so I have been hell-bent since they killed my father-in-law. You took somebody I loved. It's now time to expose all of your damn lies as much as possible. So I will sit here. I don't care how uncomfortable it makes medical doctors. I don't care how uncomfortable the things I show, declare, that are published, that I review. It doesn't matter. The medical doctors have been lied to their entire career by the people they put their faith and trust in to allow them to follow a career path to help save lives around the world, when in fact they're nothing more than drug dealers, and the American Medical Association and the pharmaceutical industry are the drug cartel, and they're giving a legal license to their drug dealers, they call medical doctors, to do their bidding. And they've all been lied to. Many have become awakened to the lies and frauds of their industry, but it's not enough of them. The majority of them are completely oblivious that they are being bought, they have been sold, and they are agents of the largest drug cartel in the world, which is the pharmaceutical industry.
The most common cause of bankruptcy in the United States is medical problems. So that is insane. It's all designed by the cartel to extract as much money from the population as possible, and they do it primarily through the drug companies.
These are the companies that gave us the opioid crisis, which is killing 110,000 Americans every year, twice as many people who were killed in the entire 20-year Vietnam War. These are our children that are being killed by this industry, and the industry worked in tandem with corrupt federal regulators to tell doctors that these kind of oxycodone was safe and effective and it was not addictive. Everybody knew it was addictive. And yet when FDA says it's safe and effective and not addictive, for some reason, American physicians put aside their own judgment and started prescribing it and created this extraordinary problem.
How is it that these pharmaceutical companies can continue to make money hand over fist with different medications that they market now, but it's not working?
There's an assault right now going on by the pharmaceutical industry worldwide. Why would all the governments around the world force you to take an experimental shot never proven safe or effective ever? Who benefits the most by forcing vaccines into you and convincing you they're safe and effective and lying to you the whole time? The pharmaceutical industry does. And they create lifelong diseases depending on which organs they get inside of and which cells they shut off. And then guess what the same industry can sell you for the rest of your life? Every drug to mask or manage the symptoms that they created inside of you and sold you on, you needed to advance your own health. It's a massive racket, and it's destroying lives all over the world.
We've seen so many lives destroyed over the past few years, haven't we? Cities across our country fired teachers, firefighters, healthcare staffers, police officers, sanitation workers, and so many others because they refused to get the shot.
These COVID vaccinations did not stop transmission. In fact, they were never tested to stop transmission before the first injections went into the arms of people in December of 2020 in the United States. Even though it was talked about that they were 95% effective, they weren't testing for this transmission. So looking back now, these people that lost their jobs, they took this shot thinking that I'll take it once or I'll take the 2-dose series and it's going to stop this transmission. We're going to get out of this pandemic. You can see now that was totally proven wrong.
It was my understanding that a vaccine means that if you get it, it prevents a certain situation from occurring in your body. Well, what the research is showing us is that these COVID-19 vaccines are not preventing, they're actually, with each booster, you have an increased likelihood of getting it.
The CDC and the FDA only require drug manufacturers show immune reactions at the site of injection, which is pretty disgusting because they're telling you vaccines are there to prevent diseases until COVID-19's vaccines. It's the first time ever they said it's not there to prevent illness. It's only there to reduce your likelihood of hospitalization or death, not to keep you from getting COVID. It's the first time ever a vaccine was ever introduced to the world where they said this doesn't actually prevent you from getting the disease we're telling you it's for. Well, if that's true, why do we need it? And then why do they tell us in the media that we need to get COVID-19 vaccines for others, to protect others? If it doesn't prevent yourself from getting COVID-19, how's it going to prevent the others? It's a massively ridiculous lie. Doesn't even make logical sense.
It is a massively ridiculous lie, but people believed it anyway. And many governors took a hardline approach. It's either my way or the highway. You either do it or we're going to punish you. And if you don't do it the way we say you should do it, then we're going to punish you more. With societal sanctions like no shots, no school, no shots, no medical care, no shots, no health insurance, no shots, no job.
Any group or entity or human being who's taken away your rights to make choices or have freedoms of choice are anti-God, and they're removing your God-given rights. And oh my God, what was this country supposedly founded on? The belief in God and the rights to freedom of choice.
Our country was founded on a belief in God and freedom of choice. But how did the United States get to a place where we are even discussing forced vaccinations? And what exactly are vaccines? Let's go all the way back to the early 1700s and learn about the concept of variolation.
So in the 1700s, there was this idea that was being used. This wasn't the first time. It's actually been around for centuries, even at that point, where if they found infections or diseases or pustules, some people believed if you could take the smallpox pustule, for example, the blister, and cut it open and extract some of the pus, you could go take a healthy person and cut open their skin and drop that pus into their body to create an immune reaction for that uninfected person against a future infection of smallpox. This is the scenario. It didn't work very well. So that went by the wayside and was replaced by vaccination.
So the idea, again, of vaccination, based on the term vaca, meaning cow, by scraping it from the udder of cows, it was identified that the milkmaids were not seemingly suffering from the so-called smallpox or cowpox. And so it was posited that maybe the exposure was preventing them from having or succumbing to the most severe forms of the disease. But they didn't really encounter how normally it would be encountered, because they weren't having open sores and open wounds in which this was being administered to them in a natural setting. In smallpox, they call it variolation, where there would be emanations from an outgrowth of the skin, for instance. Something trying to leave the body. They would take that substance, and in variolation, they would actually cut open the skin of an innocent victim and shove that material under the skin into the bodily fluids and blood with the hopes that it wouldn't cause the disease and alert the immune system in some way, shape, or form to prevent a worst case scenario. The sad reality is that in many cases, what was found is that the infection that they would cause was as devastating, or perhaps more so. We would see sepsis cases, systemic infection, unrelenting, to causing the death of the patient, and or such infection within the area of variolation where they administered it, like in the arm, that they would have to actually remove the arm of the patient before they would die of overall systemic sepsis.
Robert's correct. Some sources indicate that up to 10% of all those who were given the smallpox variolation actually died from it. Variolation eventually morphed into vaccination, and the modern vaccine era began in the late 18th century with the smallpox vaccine by Edward Jenner.
If you just take a look at the biochemistry of the body and the physiology of the body is not meant to have anything injected into it. And you can see the same thing in nature, right? What happens when you get bit or stung by a bee, or you're getting a venom injected into you? And I always have believed that with the creation of vaccines, there's always some sort of poison that's associated with that. Because if you just look at poisonous snakes, for example, they inject you, just like a needle would inject you with a poison. If you look at the history of vaccines, even dating back to that vaccine, what are you going to add into that? And you still have to inject it into the bloodstream. Looking at how nature works, whether you get bit by a poisonous snake, you get bit by a jellyfish, anything that's going to inject a toxin into you in nature can be poisonous. You have the chance of dying. If you get bit by a black mamba, you're most likely going to die if you don't have an antidote for that. So I think that what happened, if you look at the statistics back in England during the smallpox and during the creation of the vaccination, is that ultimately more people died from the vaccination than they did from the actual smallpox once the vaccination was put out.
In 1853, around then, they had a compulsory smallpox vaccination act in England and Wales. So at that point, really seeing this first time, this government steps in and says, everyone needs to take this shot. If you're a child 4 months old or older, you have to get this shot. From the 20 years since that compulsory vaccination went forward, there was more outbreaks and deaths of smallpox than 20 years before that. So it was a catastrophic failure.
It was a huge failure. The truth is that once the smallpox vaccination became mandatory in England, massive epidemics began to occur. According to the official figures of the Register General of England, between 1857 and 1859, there were 14,000 deaths from smallpox. Then, between 1863 and 1865, there were over 20,000 smallpox deaths. A few years later, there were almost 45,000 smallpox deaths between 1870 and 1872.
In 1871 and 1872, there was a really terrible smallpox outbreak, and it went through the United States, it went through England as well. And there was a town called Leicester, England. And in Leicester, England, there was an anti-compulsory vaccination league. And they found that there was this thing called the Leicester method. And they found, they've seen enough people get smallpox after getting the vaccine or die after getting the vaccine, the complications from it. So they said, well, there's a point here where we can actually take someone with smallpox and we can isolate them. We can quarantine them. Because again, think about that. Don't think about the lockdowns here in the US or in other countries or China during COVID. Think about, at that time, people were packed into houses. You had kids, 5, 6, 7 kids sleeping in one bedroom or the size of one bedroom with the whole family there. So you have one person with smallpox, outbreak happens very quickly. So they said, let's just take that person and isolate them. Let's have specific locations, hospitals or whatever, we'll isolate those people. And it was working. And people were saying, I think I'm gonna do that instead of take that shot. And by 1871, in the middle of this outbreak, we had over 1,000 parents that were refusing to get their kids compulsory vaccinations. And a lot of them decided to go to jail instead of taking the fine, just as a point of protest. 1885 happens, you have the largest, it's called anti-compulsory vaccination protest, really in the world. The world's ever seen in Leicester, England. And by 1898, they had to change that bill. So that Compulsory Vaccination Act that came through in 1853, they had to change that bill to allow for conscientious and philosophical exemptions, basically, for these kids. So a couple pieces of history, or what we can learn from that, it took a while for them to get that legislation changed, just like we see here in the United States. Once these bills pass, it's a big time uphill battle for that. But they did get that changed, and that was really the start of people saying, I think there's a better way here than compulsory government-mandated vaccination for a vaccination that doesn't stop the transmission of the illness. It's interesting because if the smallpox vaccine was put out today, we would know pretty quick that it wasn't effective. The efficacy was not quite there, just like the COVID vaccine.
Much like the COVID injections, as vaccination rates increased, so did the incidence of smallpox and deaths. But in Leicester, they refused the vaccine mandate and practiced isolation. And it worked.
We should constantly be attempting to learn from history because there's usually a current day application. And the smallpox vaccine is no exception. Here's Dr. Edward Group with more.
I think we should have learned a lot of lessons from that experience. We could have even gone this way, or we could have gone this way in the fork of the road with that smallpox European, with Edward Jenner creating the first vaccine. I think that was the start of where we are today. Unfortunately, we went the wrong way. And if you look at the numbers, and if you look at the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers, and if you look at the people that were coming into play at that time, you look at the development of drugs for money, that answers a lot of questions, because it was really about a money game, which it still is today, in my opinion. It's not about addressing the root cause. It's not about teaching people how to heal themselves, teaching people how to strengthen their immune system. For the allopathic model, is all about money, control, and taking the educational component away from you. And the development, which started from that in the 1800s, into the big pharma conglomerate, the big agriculture conglomerate, the big media, because back in the 1800s, newspapers, and they didn't have TV, but everything was about information. If they feed you the truth, or if they feed you a lie, you're not going to know the difference, because they're the ones in charge of feeding you the information to begin with. So you have big pharma, big media, big agriculture, big oil and gas, and big education. Now, big education was, let's teach it in the schools too. So the dumbing down of society from the late 1800s to the 1940s also was to keep you looking outside and never look inside, and never ask questions, never challenge what the big organizations are saying. And we're going to teach you what we want you to learn, whether it's true or whether it's false.
One of the purposes of Remedy is to challenge the status quo and ask questions about the dubious information we are constantly fed by the mainstream media.
And one of the most repeated myths today is that vaccines were responsible for the eradication of almost every communicable disease, and that we wouldn't be here today without vaccines. They saved us miraculously from all those bad germs and viruses. But is this really true?
One of the ways we know that vaccines were not the savior of mankind is by looking at reductions in disease mortality in the 20th century. It is famously reported that disease mortality reduced by 74% from 1900 to 1977. It was the great decline in disease mortality. People were living, people were not dying from disease during this time period, and vaccines took all the credit. But there are 3 studies that expose that vaccines are only responsible for maybe about 1% of that credit. The rest of the 74% is due to advances in engineering, refrigeration, access year-round to good food in supermarkets. But in particular, it is sanitation. People were washing their hands. People had access to improved plumbing. And also, especially engineers and architects and builders who decreased crowding in cities. That was major for the decline in disease mortality. So what we see for all of these diseases, such as measles, whooping cough, polio, scarlet fever, typhoid fever, tuberculosis, you see the reduction in disease mortality for all of them. But only some of them have vaccines. For example, scarlet fever, there's no vaccine for that. Yet it follows the exact same trend as other diseases for which there is a vaccine. And in many cases, such as measles, the vaccine was introduced only years later after the decline in mortality. For example, measles mortality declined massively in the 1940s and 1950s. It had basically reached zero. No one was dying from measles by the 1950s. Yet the vaccine was only introduced in the year 1963, 10 years later. Yet the vaccine claims all the credit.
People were living in extremely crowded dwellings. People took their wastewater and basically dumped them into ditches in the streets, and those eventually made their way into the drinking water at that time because there wasn't much water filtration or anything like that. You're talking livestock were packed with people, butcher houses. Around 1850, 1860, we see the first kind of consciousness change around this, and it was a movement, a sanitation movement, if you will. They gave government the authority to build water sewage treatment, to basically make overcrowding illegal, things like that, to try to really up-level the human experience here. And so you're seeing, at that point, you're seeing this big shift in the way things start happening. By 1908, you're seeing this idea of water closets, which was an indoor bathroom with indoor plumbing. You're seeing the idea of chlorinated water, which is vastly different than fluoridated water. So they started chlorinating water. You have basically no more cholera outbreaks, which was a major killer at the time, typhoid, dysentery, all that stuff starts to go away just drastically. That was really the turning point when it comes to a lot of these big killer diseases that were monsters in the past. You started to see that really start to wind down.
Routine vaccination of the American public against smallpox stopped in 1972 after the disease was eradicated in the United States. In 1979, the World Health Organization officially declared that smallpox had been eradicated. Here's Dr. Brian Ardis discussing a natural remedy for smallpox, although you won't hear about this on the nightly news.
There's been a lot of attention going on right now around the world about concerns that there's been smallpox, like doses of it being found in vaults or health agencies, departments, like they've got smallpox in their refrigerators. Why would they have that? And there's concerns that smallpox is going to become another threat. Supposedly it was eradicated back in the 1970s. Is there an antidote to smallpox? Yeah, Native Americans had one for years and years and years and years and years and years. I mean, since like the 1700s. So there is a plant called Sarracenia purpura. It's better known as the pitcher plant, but there's extracts of that are absolutely proven. Not by Native Americans even though they utilized it to do that. But there are individuals at the University of Arizona who have confirmed in the last several years, just in the last couple of years, that the pitcher plant, this Sarracenia purpura extract, completely inhibits smallpox viral replication. That's published. That's not a theory or a conspiracy. No one has to worry about smallpox. There's always been a plant-proven antidote for smallpox.
Historical sources suggest that in the 1800s, when smallpox still posed a serious threat, the Micmac Native Americans of Nova Scotia treated the disease using a botanical infusion derived from the insectivorous plant called Sarracenia purpurea, a species of the pitcher plant.
And there were other remedies being utilized during the same time period.
During the mid-1800s, when iodine was first created, iodine was a very powerful remedy for working with smallpox. And there's also evidence of natural immunity, antibody creative processes that the body goes through or that God creates would be mother's milk, colostrum. That's going to transfer antibodies. So if there were pregnant individuals, let's say the mom had recovered from smallpox, then had a baby, then they could use that colostrum from the mother's milk, and they could even dilute that into homeopathics.
Homeoprophylaxis is a technique utilized by homeopaths to prevent disease from occurring, per se. Although it's fascinating because it's a little bit, well, let's just say it's distinctly different from vaccination as a means of protection or prevention. Whereas they would utilize via typically injection quantities of substances that can cause disease, yet they would claim they're either attenuated or killed. What we would do in homeopathy is convert those disease-causing organisms or disease processes from something manifesting in the midst of something like smallpox and convert them via serial dilution and succussion to a point where they could not any longer cause the disease, no possibility of actually causing it. So it's a much safer way to do that. And so what we do in homeopathy is quite different. We will take substances from disease processes, like the pus that would come out in terms of a canker or a sore of some kind, and then convert that form into a homeopathic remedy via serial dilution and succussion, completely neutralizing whatever it is so that it couldn't possibly cause disease, but have the elements of that original reality or substance and introduced more of in a subtle form. And then it would be taken primarily orally, because typically how do we encounter the world? Through various means of normal exposure, through the skin, could be the mucous membranes through the eyes, the nose, or the mouth, through ingestion. So this is a big part of the difference and distinction with homeoprophylaxis. We can take these things and we convert them, and we call them nosodes, N-O-S-O-D-E-S, nosodes. And there are nosodes for any and every disease or disease process you can imagine, whether it be smallpox, diphtheria, tetanus, polio, measles, mumps, rubella, pertussis, influenza, meningitis. And it's just an extraordinary thing to realize that you can take any of these things and convert them for safe ingestion via a homeoprophylactic method. In Cuba some years ago, when they had been unable to afford the leptospirosis vaccines that they were relying upon every year in the wet or rainy season, there would be a lot of stagnant water and pools and things that were growing, and then that would impact the health of those that were exposed to it. And the leptospirosis was deadly in some cases. And so when they could not access the vaccinations, they found that for pennies on the dollar, they could afford the homeopathic version of leptospirosis, and they applied it. And not only did the result of the homeoprophylaxis, in that case almost nationwide in Cuba, result in far fewer cases, but it also resulted in far fewer deaths. And that extended not just 1 year, but into 2 years. And so this was quite extraordinary to realize that there are methods of preventive use of homeopathic remedies, not just reactive use.
This account of Cuba's successful treatment of leptospirosis with homeopathy is well documented. As Robert Scott Bell just mentioned, there are homeopathic nosodes. They're readily available online or in your local health food store for all of the major vaccines, including MMR, flu, meningitis, DTaP, and even smallpox. Although natural smallpox no longer poses a health threat.
Nevertheless, there is a remote possibility that it could eventually be used as a biological warfare agent. So these are vital remedies to put in your quiver.
And that's why we created Remedy. because you deserve the truth, and you deserve answers and solutions. Do you have friends and family that need this information too? Please share the viewing link with them, and please share it on social media as well.
We invite you to join forces with us to help defeat the censorship industrial complex. Please share this docuseries with everyone you know. We really appreciate your help in getting this life-saving information out to everybody who needs it.
So back to smallpox. About a decade after the city of Leicester, England proved that isolation rather than vaccination was the key to stopping smallpox, in 1905, the U.S. Supreme Court in Jacobson versus Massachusetts said that the states had the constitutional authority to use police powers to mandate the smallpox vaccine. A horrific decision against medical freedom. Since then, many court cases regarding mandatory vaccines have cited the 1905 Jacobson versus Massachusetts decision, including the 1927 Supreme Court case Buck versus Bell.
Buck versus Bell was a United States Supreme Court case from 1927, where the Supreme Court decided that the same principle that legalizes mandatory vaccination allows for the sterilization of mentally handicapped individuals. The Buck v. Bell decision came out of the Jacobson era. The case Jacobson versus Massachusetts was a Supreme Court case where a preacher from Massachusetts named Henning Jacobson challenged a local ordinance that required all residents of a county to receive a smallpox vaccination. And if they did not receive the smallpox vaccination, they would have to either pay a fine of $5 or they would have to leave the jurisdiction, meaning leave the county. And Henning Jacobson challenged this law after he was convicted under it, because he decided not to pay the fine and not to leave the jurisdiction. And the case went all the way to the United States Supreme Court, where Justice Harlan, writing for the court, said that mandatory vaccination is like a military draft. In the same way that the military can draft individuals to go to war, so too the public health department can draft individuals to go to war on disease. And that was the principle that sustained the decision. And that case has been cited since 1905 all the way to today in favor of mandatory vaccination.
One of the principles here is the principle of autonomy. Only the person can have control over their own body. When the principle of autonomy is given up, under no circumstances can that person be thought to have any additional civil rights. That's actually the last right to be taken. A person in prison, in a prison block, can still maintain their personal autonomy. But if they have a vaccine forced in them against their will, their autonomy is violated. So it's actually worse than being in a prison to have a vaccine forced, to be forced to undergo a procedure. This happened years ago in a horrific time called eugenics, where there was forced sterilization.
Buck versus Bell essentially said it was okay for states in the United States of America to pass eugenics laws to force sterilize those who were deemed unfit to breed.
No one ever should allow governments around the world or any industry to mandate or force us to do anything against our will. That's called communism.
Communism was what we grew up fighting, wasn't it? It's why we were so ecstatic in 1980 when the USA beat the CCCP USSR in hockey. I was 12 and I still vividly remember it like it was yesterday. I still get chills when I watch that. Communism was the enemy. We hated communism. It's what President Ronald Reagan was fighting against.
But at the same time, in the mid-1980s, when he was condemning the communism of the CCCP, he also signed a bill that had horrific consequences.
I think that the origins of the current dilemma that we face globally with vaccines in general and the coronavirus vaccine in particular, I hesitate to call it a vaccine, but the coronavirus shots, started with the 1986 Act. And this was the passage into the writing into law of the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act, which took away liability from the manufacturers for injury and death caused by their vaccines if they were on the CDC's recommended schedule. And this applied initially to childhood vaccines, and it came about because of problems with the wholesale pertussis vaccine. Huge problems that when we go back, as we do in the film, 1986, the act, we go back into the history of that, you see how corruption in the medical profession and the industry allowed them to pervert the course of justice, to blackmail Congress, and to get them to pass this act, which took away almost all liability from the pharmaceutical companies, with the exception of fraud. And what happened beyond that point? When they had no liability, they had the perfect business model. They had a mandatory market. Every child in the United States to receive a public school education was required to be fully vaccinated. And they had no liability. So they had a mandatory market, no liability. They had the perfect business model. All they could do was make a massive profit, and that's what they did. But worse than that, they realized that they could now expand the vaccine program dramatically for increasingly more trivial diseases.
Ronald Reagan signed a bill in 1986 that provided immunity to all manufacturers of vaccines in 1986, which means any pharmaceutical drug company could create any vaccine they wanted, and if it hurt someone, it never mattered. You can't sue that company. They're not liable for the injury because the vaccines, supposedly now per Ronald Reagan and signing this bill, are too great, and the benefits far outweigh the risk. And so we can't allow Big Pharma, the pharmaceutical giants who pushed for this bill with Ronald Reagan, their threat was, we're not going to manufacture vaccines anymore unless you, the government, provide immunity to us, because we're losing our butts on lawsuits for injuries with our vaccine program. Since 1986, there has never been a drug company who had to pay out injuries to someone for receiving their vaccine. Can you believe there is a industry of any kind who makes a product commercially available and they are completely devoid of any responsibility for injury or harm to the individuals that receive it? It's out of this world to me. McDonald's got sued for handing somebody a coffee that got spilt on her and it burned her. She said it was too hot to be delivered through a drive-thru, and she won massive amounts of money for compensation.
Up through 1972, the general public was given the smallpox vaccine routinely. And they stopped doing that in 1972. And then up through 1985, there were only 3 vaccines in the childhood schedule. There was MMR, DPT, and polio. So when I was in medical school, there really wasn't much to talk about. There were those 3 shots. You learned how to give them. They were not mandatory or required. Some people got 3 or 4 shots of DPT, some didn't. They only recommended 1 MMR at that time. There were 3 doses of polio at that time. So there really wasn't much to talk about. I don't remember having any specific class or any specific education on the vaccines up through that period of time. And then it wasn't until the Vaccine Injury Compensation Act passed in 1986 that the wrap-up of the schedule began in 1991. And from there, now today, children get 16 or 17 doses of vaccine, depending on how you count them, and up to 72 different vaccines by the time they're 18 years of age.
The Vaccine Act was passed in 86. It gave immunity from liability to the vaccine companies. There was then a gold rush by the vaccine companies to add new vaccines to the schedule. Each new vaccine can guarantee that company up to $1 billion a year without any advertising or marketing costs, because the vaccines are mandated for 76 million children by the government. They can save money on safety studies because it's the only medical product that doesn't have to do pre-licensing safety trials. That's hundreds of millions of dollars in savings potentially. And they save money also on downstream liabilities because they're immune from liability. So these products are just like printing money. So there was a gold rush to add new ones. By 1989, the vaccine schedule had exploded.
The vaccine schedule ramped up dramatically, and that made them very, very wealthy, very powerful. They came to control the media. They came to control the medical profession, medical training, the medical societies such as the American Academy of Pediatrics. They came to own doctors. They came to own medical schools. They came to own everything. They bought politicians. They bought people within the regulatory agencies like the FDA and the CDC. They bought influence, and they were very successful at doing it. And that made them even more powerful. And so we now face a situation, catastrophic situation with the COVID shots, where once again, they put it onto the childhood vaccine schedule of recommended vaccines so that those vaccines are now exempt from liability for death and injury, even though they are entirely experimental, entirely new forms of genetic manipulation, in effect. And those who are injured really are going to have a terrible time proving liability, proving fraud, getting any kind of compensation. And this is extremely important to know, is that the Act put the burden, the onus upon the patient, the injured person, to prove that it was the vaccine, not the other way around. Not the industry had to prove that the vaccine did not cause it, that the vaccine was safe. The burden of proof was now upon the injured party. How can they do that? If you're a person who is not trained in science, you don't have a laboratory, you don't have a training in epidemiology or reading scientific papers, you're not well. You've fallen ill as a consequence. You're struggling to just stay alive and to live from day to day. How can you possibly win against the might of the pharmaceutical industry, backed by the government? You can't. And so it is iniquitous and in a very, very dangerous situation in which we find ourselves.
Shockingly, since the 1986 Act, almost $5 billion have been paid out to the families of vaccine-damaged children. But the money did not come from the vaccine manufacturers, since they have immunity.
That's right. The money actually came from the Vaccine Injury Trust Fund, also known as the VICP, Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, which is funded by a 75 cents per dose excise tax that is collected on every vaccine that's sold and given to children and adults in the United States. And get this, the plaintiff, in other words, the injured family, files a claim against the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services in the U.S. Court of Federal Claims, seeking compensation from the Vaccine Injury Trust Fund. And the United States Department of Justice actually gets involved, and a court-appointed special master decides whether or not to compensate the plaintiff, the injured family. The fact that there is a Vaccine Injury Trust Fund proves that vaccines can injure, and they are not safe. Since 1986, the CDC has been legally obligated to conduct safety studies and issue a safety report on children's vaccines every 2 years. In 2018, it was determined they had never done this.
7 years prior, in 2011, there was a landmark Supreme Court case with a shocking ruling about the safety of vaccines.
2011, the pharmaceutical attorneys in this Supreme Court case, they even pitch drug companies cannot be held liable for vaccine injuries because vaccines by nature are unavoidably unsafe. Really? Then why in the world are we giving those to people? And if it's unavoidably unsafe as a technology, why are we making it required, or at least projecting a narrative that it's required that every child in America has to get all these vaccines that are deemed by the attorneys representing the pharmaceutical industry to the Supreme Court, vaccines are unavoidably unsafe? If that's the case, why are we requiring all children to receive them before they go to our federally funded and tax-backed public health school or public school systems? Why are we doing that? It's ridiculous. They know it's unavoidably unsafe, and they even use that as their argument to protect them from liability.
At that time, with the law, it said if you could make vaccines safer, if it was a design defect and you could make vaccines safer, and you didn't do so, then you're liable for everything. So in 2009, what we showed was we could no longer manufacture any vaccine in an animal or human cell line, yeast, baculovirus, nothing. It was the fermentation. It was the monkey kidney cells. It was the dog cells. So the Bruchewitz decision by 11 So our paper was out almost 2 years, from October 8th, 2009. By October 11th, you know, Tony Fauci knows he has a problem, and he knows we know it. And so that Bruchewitz decision just literally shut down Design Defect, because they said, oh, we can't make them any other way.
Although vaccine injuries are extremely common, the reality is that other than general symptoms like redness at the site of injection, doctors are not really taught how to spot a vaccine adverse reaction.
Doctors are not taught what a vaccine adverse reaction looks like. In fact, when a parent calls the doctor and says, my child was vaccinated, I can't wake him up, he'll only wake up to feed, he's sleeping for 2 days, the parent is told that's normal. And when the parent raises the question, could this have been from the vaccine? Meanwhile, the kid had never done that before. The doctor almost unanimously says, no, it's just a coincidence. That kid suffered brain damage. Sleeping for 2 days as an infant, not waking up other than to feed, that kid was brain damaged. Had brain inflammation. Not waking up for 2 days other than to feed is a neurological event. That's not normal. And that's from the injection of material into the brain. Something is happening to the brains of our children. Something is interfering with the normal neurosequencing of brain development. Because when babies are born, their brain is not developed. When babies are born, they have more nerve cells than their brains need. And it's through life experience that the tracks are laid down to create the proper sequencing of muscular development, speech development, cognitive development, and emotional development. Something is interfering with the proper sequence of those steps. Something is getting in the way of the brain developing properly. No one is asking the question, why?
We should be asking why, especially since vaccine injury is becoming even more common with the advent of COVID-19 and the subsequent injections, which were pushed on the world in a campaign of fear.
They forced them down our throats. They scared us. They scared us through social media, through the news, through TV. This was a well-planned event, and it was intended to test us, see where we would fight, where we wouldn't, to see if they could get us kind of as a culture indoctrinated into vaccines are part of our everyday life. Even though, you know this, they're not even vaccines by any definition. They don't prevent transmission, and they don't prevent you from getting it. So, I mean, what's the point here, folks? It doesn't make any sense. It's illogical.
John Stockton has a very good point. It is totally illogical. And he's correct. They are not vaccines, since they don't stop transmission of COVID-19, which is why we are calling them injections. And when it comes to these injections, it seems that logic got thrown out the window a long time ago. And despite the fact that the Supreme Court has ruled that vaccines are, quote, unavoidably unsafe, if you even question the CDC on any of the vaccines on their recommended schedule, somehow you are automatically labeled an anti-vaxxer, whatever that means. Here's my reframe when people mention anti-vaxxers. Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines an anti-vaxxer as a person who opposes the use of some or all vaccines. But only 16% of Americans have gotten their bivalent COVID booster. So that would seem to imply that 84% of Americans are now anti-vaxxers.
I don't know why they call them anti-vaxxers. They're actually just people that put more faith in God's natural immunity than they do science-created, lab-created, suggested immunity.
It's simply an industry talking point that people fell for. And the people using it, I'm sorry, you're suckers, but you fell for a public relations talking point that's not even true. Most people that I've met that have been considered anti-vaxxers fully vaccinated their kids. They were the most vaccinated people and families that they knew until an injury happened, until a harm happened, and then they had to stop. They questioned it. And of course, when you stop, when you get off that treadmill, you are now by definition an anti-vaxxer. So if you look at the history of this, again, it's an industry talking point. The industry does this. They've done it for a lot of different things. It just happened to stick on this one. Maybe because they had better marketing, who knows? They did it with fluoride, anti-fluoriders, that's a word in the literature. Anti-opioid, when they were doing the opioid push, Purdue Pharma, people were using the word anti-opioid to go after doctors that wouldn't prescribe this. And they say, look at this doctor, he wants his patient to be in pain. He won't even give him these drugs. What a terrible doctor. He's an anti-opioid doctor. And you see this throughout the literature, whether it's talc powder, whether it's asbestos, whether it is a Roundup, glyphosate. There's an attack profile for companies, pharmaceutical companies, and then with their lobbied politicians, that there's a concerted effort to attack the medical community, the doctors speaking out against it. But with the vaccine conversation, there weren't a lot of doctors speaking out against that because they made a lot of money with that. There was no reason for them to really kill their cash cow. Who spoke out against that? Parents of vaccine-injured kids. So they needed something to really neutralize those people, and anti-vaxxer was a great way to push them aside, and unfortunately it stuck. But again, the silver lining in COVID, as terrible as it woke a lot of people up to say, this vaccine's not tested properly. It wasn't even tested to stop efficacy or transmission. I don't want to take it, and I'm an anti-vaxxer. Well, I'm also part of about 60% of the country at this point, so they have a problem on their hands. It'll be interesting to see how they really sort this out, because it'll be the main topic, I predict, of the 2024 presidential election.
Anti-vaxxer just means that we've analyzed very carefully the contents of these shots and the benefits versus risks. And we have made a conscious decision that we don't want to inject that crap into our body, and the risks outweigh the benefits.
That is something called linguistic manipulation. Okay, and George Orwell talked about this, right? War is peace, hate is love, those kinds of things, right? Well, it wasn't a pandemic, so don't call it that. It's not a vaccine by definition because it doesn't prevent it, so don't call it that, right? And therefore you don't call it the cute little thing of vax. And then also, when I go outside and I get jabbed by a branch, or I jab my friend, that's a jab, innocuous, benign. Not these things. But they threw that word in immediately, and everyone started, did you get jabbed? Yeah, I got jabbed. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is that don't even use their words, because then you're in their video game. And if you're in their video game, you can't win. They made the rules.
Our country have implemented something called a vaccine on the will of the people, and the vaccine is not even doing what a vaccine is supposed to be doing. And nobody wants to truly investigate that. I have a big issue with it. One thing I refuse to do is to allow my sister's death to be in vain. If it took her body, me understanding certain things, for me to speak out to save somebody else, then so be it. I refuse to be scared of anybody. I refuse to be scared of this government. I refuse to stop speaking out about the truth.
We love Silk, and we agree with her 100%. We are never going to stop telling the truth either. That's why we created Remedy, because you deserve the truth, and you deserve answers and solutions. Do you have friends and family that need to be watching this too? Then please share this link with them. And please share it on social media too.
The Great Awakening is happening, and we're asking you to join forces with us to help defeat the censorship industrial complex. So please share this docuseries with everyone you know. We really appreciate your help in getting this life-saving information to everyone who needs it.
Since the 1986 Act, with the removal of all liability, the CDC's vaccine schedule keeps growing and growing and growing.
When I was a baby in 1968, I got about 3 or 4 vaccines in total, and I was considered to be fully vaccinated. But in order to be fully vaccinated today, it is much, much different. What we have now is about 75 doses of 17 vaccines that the federal government, the CDC, is saying that all the children should get from the day they're born to age 18.
The sad reality is that the United States of America has the most vaccines of any industrialized nation in the world, and we also have the highest infant mortality.
We, of course, in the United States have the most aggressive vaccine schedule. We also now have the highest infant mortality of any industrialized country. I mean, that's the best indicator of the health of your population, and we're at the bottom. The more vaccines, the higher the infant mortality, and that's true. Number one, U.S. is number one in number of vaccines, number one in infant mortality.
CDC does recommend that infants or small children get vaccinated at 2, 4, and 6 months, and they're given a cocktail of vaccines. And here's the problem. The problem is that there has not, to my knowledge, been a study actually showing that giving all of these vaccines at the same time is safe. What can you as a parent do about that? I can tell you that when my children received vaccines when they were younger, I asked my pediatrician to separate these vaccines out, and they did. I don't know how happy they were about that, but they did do this. And so you can ask to spread these out. They do not all have to be given in one day.
As Dr. Sawhney just mentioned, one option for you, if you're dead set on vaccinating your child, is to at least get the pediatrician to spread them out. Because in 2013, the Institute of Medicine, National Academy of Sciences, they issued a report that said that the CDC's current schedule has never been adequately studied for safety. Although the CDC has conducted dubious and several debunked studies on the vaccine separately, they don't even claim that they've been studied in the combined schedule, including giving 8 to 10 vaccines on one day.
Less than a decade after this damning Institute of Medicine report, along came COVID-19 and the global push for everyone to take the experimental COVID injections.
From Jenner's smallpox vaccine, to Jacobson versus Massachusetts, to Buck versus Bell, to the 1986 Act, to Bruzovitz versus Wyeth, the path had been paved.
The Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System, or VAERS, was implemented to track vaccine injuries. And according to VAERS, the COVID-19 injections are causing serious injury to millions all over the globe.
COVID-19, we've had reports to the VAERS right now that there's over 30,000 people who have died within a 2-week period of receiving the COVID-19 vaccines. 30,000. There's been no repercussions, no one held liable at all. But in the same time period that 30,000 people have been reportedly died or killed as a result of the vaccines within a 2-week period of receiving them, how is it possible that there's a company that makes a stationary bicycle in your home called Peloton? How is it possible that Peloton releases a treadmill? And during the same time period that the vaccines are going around the country, 30,000 people have reported to the government have died from this shot. How is it possible that Peloton, a publicly traded company, releases a treadmill and one toddler got sucked under the treadmill and died from injuries? And then Peloton lost $4 billion in stock value overnight. And then Peloton had to recall all of their stuff, stop selling their treadmills, remake the treadmill and prove its safety has been improved before they can release it again. How come that company, who makes a treadmill and a stationary bicycle, can have consequences financially to them not taking precautions to ensure their product's safe and effective, and it kills one kid? How is it possible that's removed from the market? How is there no consequence whatsoever to the pharmaceutical industry?
We go back to this VAERS system in the United States. Alongside the VAERS system, we had something called vSafe. vSafe was this app. So when the COVID-19 vaccine came out, they launched this app and they told people, you can enroll in this app if you get the shot, and you can give us daily updates on your app. How you doing? How you feeling? And they use that for data collection as well. And so the Informed Consent Action Network sued several times and received the data for that, over 100 million pieces of data, and they put it in this dashboard. And we found that out of about a little over 10 million people, basically 7.4% of them had to seek medical care, either hospital, ICU, even telehealth, after their shot. So we have a number finally. So this VAERS is completely not reliant and not reliable, and scientific research will say that. They'll say as a caveat, we use VAERS system, but it's not really reliable. But we have this number now, 7.4%. Well, around the same time, Germany came out with, there's a BKK insurance company in Germany. They're one of the largest insurance companies in Germany. One of their board of directors put an open letter out, sent it to their health agency as well, and said, we ran some numbers within our insured people, within in-house basically. We looked at the ICD codes. Those are the codes that medical doctors put on your chart when you come in. So if you come in for strep throat, there's an ICD code for strep throat, and that's how they bill your company. So they bill the insurance company. So vaccine injury, vaccine harms, severe adverse events, they have ICD codes too. A lot of people don't know that. So this company ran the ICD codes for these vaccine injuries in over, again, just a little over 10 million people, and they found anywhere from 4 to 5% were having these reactions. So extrapolated out to the entire German population, they said, if we use these numbers, about 4 to 5% of the entire German population would be having these adverse events. So now we finally have a number. 4% on the low end to about 7.4% of all people that got this shot are having severe adverse events, all the way from sore arm to death, neurological issues, or whatever.
Stepping back to think about the VAERS vaccine injury reporting system, which has a 99% failure rate. Can you imagine any other industry where you prepare an accounting system that fails 99% of the time? You would be fired if you failed 99% of the time in accounting. Yet, when it comes to the government accounting for vaccine injuries, that is their official system. They've never tried to improve it. And the reason why they've never tried to improve it is because it is designed to fail.
I'm just in shock on some level at the level of collusion that I'm witnessing in the international media when it comes to sudden deaths associated with the vaccine jabs. Now, because it's just so unconscionable, and I don't want to use the word criminal because that's what they're using against individuals like us that are doing quite the opposite, trying to hold accountable those who seem to be engaged in criminal activity. But it's just insane making when you consider that the VAERS database alone, which has maybe 1% capture of the actual rates of side effects and or deaths. So let's say the 30,000 plus deaths right now that have been reported to VAERS only represents 1% of the submerged iceberg of what's probably out there. And those are acute, highly visible events where someone literally dies. Can you imagine the subclinical adverse effects such as cancers, right, that wouldn't even make it into VAERS? So this is such a disturbing reality that we live in right now, that because all the mainstream media sources that really still the vast majority of people are consuming, I make the point sometimes that who needs like fluoride in the drinking water when you have mainstream media? It has the same effect. I mean, it really dumbs down and it shuts down empathy, and it just makes people seemingly oblivious of the obvious.
CDC, from a VAERS signal, knew as early as February 19th, 2021. This is 10 weeks, after the release of the Pfizer vaccine, that there was a statistically significant signal of myocarditis in young adult males. And so they knew this on February 19th, and they hemmed and hawed. They were actually, we found this via FOIA, they were contacted by the Israeli Ministry of Health about myocarditis and looking at myocarditis in February, in March, in April, and the statistical signal became stronger and stronger. There were actually reports of myocarditis, and the CDC did not relent. They did not disclose any information regarding this signal until 3 months later, on May 27th, 2021. And the reason why the CDC sat on that information is they wanted vaccination rates to become high. They did not want to waste vaccine. They wanted to make sure that Pfizer made money. Pfizer contributes to the CDC through the CDC Foundation. And so the vaccination rate from the time that the myocarditis signal was picked up in February until the CDC actually said something about it, the vaccination rate in the United States went from 8% to 50% of all adults. And so they put that 42% of individuals who got the vaccine, they put them in harm's way knowingly, just so they could increase the vaccination rate for, some artificial metric. And also, it was money and power. It was money and power, and they could not disclose those statistically significant signals because that would have curtailed the vaccination program and it would have caused vaccination rates to be lower. So the CDC has blood on their hands.
How is it possible that they are allowed to own and receive royalties and revenues and commissions on the vaccines they're promoting? I would consider that, and so would everyone else in the entire world, a massive conflict of interest, and that should be removed from them. They have now become a vaccine-pushing, vaccine-lying about their data organization, and they should not be trusted.
And while everyone was sleeping, focusing on the invasion of the southern border, the Ukrainian conflict, and the bank failures, the CDC recently added the COVID-19 injection to the recommended schedule.
According to the CDC, your 6-month-old baby needs these COVID mRNA injections, which have never been tested for safety in infants. And as we previously mentioned, neither has the entire CDC schedule.
When I was born, I can tell you that there were 3 shots, 3 vaccines covering 5 different illnesses. A child born today would face a total of 72 shots against 16 different diseases, not including SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19. Recently, the ACIP panel inserted the COVID-19 vaccine starting at 6 months, primary series, then every 6 months injections. This now means a child today would face nearly 100 injections over the course of childhood life. That is unimaginable that the human body could manage that many different types of antigens, ranging from live attenuated, killed, antigen, and now genetic-based vaccines. I can tell you as a doctor, it's gone way too far. I can provide no assurances that this hyper-vaccination orthodoxy is safe for children, nor can I provide any assurances that it has any long-term safety, and I'm greatly concerned.
When I was a kid, we went to see our doctor. We only went to see our doctor when we were sick. If we had a bad flu and a high fever, or if we needed stitches, But today's kids go regularly to a physician's office on, I think, 10 separate wellness visits. And that creates foot traffic in those offices. Each office visit there's a charge for, and then there's bonuses that come from administering the vaccine, up to 9 vaccines at a time in each of those visits, and there's bonuses attached to all of them.
If you're going to the pediatrician for what is called a shot day, it's 2, 4, 6 months, and 1 year. They're the pediatric routine checkups that were set up according to the insurance schedule. That what the insurance was willing to pay was for office visits at 2, 4, 6 months, and 1 year. So the pediatric vaccine schedule was set up according to that, not according to when your child needs it or when your immune system has rebounded from the previous round of shots. It was just set up for doctor convenience and according to insurance. So I frequently recommend that parents look at what the schedule is. It's freely available. You can find it all over the internet. The CDC actually has some pretty nice colored posters that you can print out and you can see on any given office visit what shots you're going to get. Then the parents should look at the package inserts, because I can almost guarantee you your physician has not. And then you, the parent, memorize 1 or 2 or 3 ingredients inside a shot. And when you get in front of your pediatrician or your family doctor or your nurse practitioner to say, you're recommending that my child gets a DPT vaccine today. Can you tell me any ingredients that are in that DPT shot? And I can almost assure you they won't. And then you can say to them, well, I read the package insert and I saw that these 3 ingredients were in this shot. Will this be harmful to my child? My child has asthma and eczema. Is this a good thing to inject into their body? What if they have a reaction? You can't uninject it. You can't pretend that you didn't give it. And now that it's been injected, now what do I do if they have a reaction? And I think it's very important and empowering for parents to take that on the front load of that and to know what's in those shots for themselves, because I'm pretty sure the pediatricians or the nurse practitioners or people at the health clinics are not going to know, and they're not going to be able to answer those questions for you.
Next time you're at the pediatrician, why don't you ask them about whether or not they are financially incentivized to make sure that their patients follow the entire CDC schedule?
There's other things the parents should know about too, that your physician is getting paid bonuses, in many cases $400 per vaccine, to make sure your child gets that vaccine. And the parents ought to know that too. They ought to know that the insurance companies and the HMOs are giving these, Blue Cross Blue Shield, big financial incentives to your physician to inoculate you.
For the pediatric childhood schedule, there is something called the Combo 10, that there are 10 different types of vaccines that children should get multiple doses of by the time they are 2 years of age. That's supported by a federal organization called Every Child by Two. And there was an incentive program by Blue Cross Blue Shield that said if 63% of the children in your practice had every dose of this Combo 10, every dose of these 10 vaccines by the time they were 2 years of age, that Blue Cross Blue Shield would give you a $400 per child bonus. And it wasn't just on the 63% that were vaccinated, it was on your entire practice.
I published some data that show that the typical pediatrician's office gets about 50% of its revenue from the vaccines. And that doesn't mean directly from the vaccines, but from the traffic that results from these wellness visits and from the bonuses that they're paid for by the insurance industry, the HMOs, etc. So the pediatrician has a huge economic incentive to make sure that your child gets vaccinated.
So you can imagine if you've got 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 children in your practice and it's a multi-pediatrician clinic, you can kind of do the math on what that incentive is to poison your children.
In the late 1990s, less than a decade from when the CDC's vaccine ramp-up began, we know that the U.S. federal agencies began funding gain-of-function research. Research that's, by its very nature, designed to increase the ability of pathogens to infect and harm people. In 2019, one of those pathogens was released upon the world in Wuhan, China, in what many have called a bioweapon.
The key to understanding COVID-19 is its spike protein. The very same spike protein now being created in millions of people after the COVID-19 shots are injected into them. These vaccines are nothing more than the genetic code of a COVID-19 bioweapon.
The COVID shots are absolutely bioweapons. That's been proven by definition. It's been proven by what's in them. We now know that the Department of Defense was involved with Operation Warp Speed and responsible for the NIH moving forward. More and more is coming out all the time about why Pfizer and Moderna are saying we can't be sued. We delivered to the Department of Defense exactly what the U.S. government asked for.
On the Moderna vaccine, NIH owns half that vaccine patent and is making billions and billions of dollars on sales of that product. Not only that, but individuals within NIH who worked on the Moderna vaccine, I think there's either 4 or 6 of them, who are now allowed to collect $150,000 forever. Their children, their children's children, as long as that vaccine is on the market or the platform, the mRNA platform, they will be getting rich. So those individuals have lost their incentive to find problems with that product, which is what you want the regulators to be doing. And instead, they know that if that product gets to market, it's going to pay for their home, for their boat, for their child's education, and they have a lot of incentive to overlook potential problems with it.
These are travesties. These are deadly bioweapons that kill people. And now that we've seen the data, the raw data that Ed Dowd has put out in the Cause Unknown book that he has, the raw data, he's just a numbers guy. He's just looking at the numbers of all-cause mortality, the increased spike in total disabilities, the increased spike in people that have just been harmed. And we are going to be looking at harm from these shots for another decade, with the cardiovascular side effects, with the neurological complications, with the renal failure, with the autoimmune diseases. It's not going to go away. And each booster that somebody succumbs to, it's going to be even worse. And these are definitely bioweapons that are causing more death and carnage than anything that's been released on the planet, perhaps in the history of humanity.
I believe that COVID-19 mRNA vaccines are, in fact, biological weapons, that they are designed to harm. They are designed to turn the human body into a walking bioweapons factory, to shed toxic particles onto other people and to sicken the people around them. I believe the vaccines are designed to actually promote the pandemic and cause hospitalizations and harm and infertility and spontaneous abortions as part of a scheme to suppress the human population and to make people as sick as possible and to destroy their immune systems, to make them vulnerable to the next bioweapon that is dropped on the population, which is coming, by the way.
I believe that both COVID-19 and the COVID-19 mRNA jabs are both bioweapons. And it still amazes me that people will look me in the eye and say, no, it came from a bat from the market.
I think the vaccines and the COVID jab are an example of bioweapons ultimately.
Multiple studies show with each and every injection of the COVID-19 vaccine that clinical outcomes worsen. There's higher rates of hospitalization and death with COVID-19. A study from the Cleveland Clinic population showed with every single additional dose, there was actually higher rates of getting COVID infection and reinfection. So the vaccines backfire.
The vaccines backfire. Or are they actually doing what they were intended to do? Regardless of whether this was intentional or not, the truth is that there are remedies to help mitigate the damage that's being done. And that's what we're going to focus on for the remainder of this episode.
And in each subsequent episode, we'll be sharing lots more unique remedies. So you don't want to miss any episodes. These remedies literally may save your life or the life of someone you love. Here's a good friend, Mike Adams, a health ranger.
There's a Chinese herb that's been used for thousands of years to end pandemics. In Chinese medicine, it's called Bajiao. And it's known in English as star anise. And this herb contains a molecule called shikimic acid. Shikimic acid is used by the pharmaceutical company Roche to manufacture Tamiflu, which is known to stop pandemics because it contains shikimic acid. And there are a lot of other herbs that contain shikimic acid, including pine needles or fennel seeds, by the way. So why is this information being withheld from the public when we know that shikimic acid is used in the pharmaceutical that is used to stop viral epidemics, and we know that that same molecule comes from nature? In fact, Roche harvests pine needles to get the shikimic acid to make their drug. But then we're told by the powers that be, oh, you can't talk about pine needles. You can only talk about vaccines, or maybe this prescription drug that uses the pine needle molecule, but you can't talk about pine needles. That's the level of insane censorship that has been unleashed against the natural health practitioners and advocates who are trying to save lives. We are the ones who have the answers. We can save millions of lives with this knowledge, and it is being deliberately suppressed to deprive the public of this information that can literally save lives and help end human suffering.
Shikimate is an important compound for the core neurological health of the human being and of all mammals. And in plants, we call it the shikimate pathway. That's like their core nervous system development. You know, we think of plant with a nervous system. They do have a nervous system, a rudimentary nervous system, but it expresses differently. The shikimate pathway will express as a color. It'll express as a smell. In us, it doesn't express that way. It expresses as a movement, right? And a coordinated movement. So shikimic acid or shikimate's very good for Parkinson's. And it's very good for developmental problems in children. People have had their children jab injured. Shikimate is very good for children that are either autistic on the spectrum somewhere, jab injuries, because it helps to develop the core coordination faculties. And that could be pine needle tea is a really good one. In Texas, you may remember the liquid ambar tree. What do they call them? They call them sweet gums. In the South, we call them sweet gums. And they form a ball that drops off the tree and has all these spikes on it. Looks like a coronavirus, right? See, this is how obvious everything. Like in God's reality, everything's obvious. Everything's right there. The thing that looks like it's dropping right in the ground, right in front of you, it looks like a coronavirus. You put that in a tea, that's got one of the highest levels of shikimate of anything in the ecosystem. So there's another one. Sprouts are really high in shikimate. So that's another great one. And so pine needles. Another big category, by the way, is star anise and schizandra for the shikimate. And I would put, for those of you who are herbal and you're like, okay, I want something that kind of covers all these bases and kind of does everything, schizandra berry is what I would put in there. Now, in the lineage of Chinese medicine that I was taught in, schizandra is considered the #1 herb in the world. Now, you wouldn't just say that about just any old thing, and it's a berry too, so that's kind of cool. It's berries are a little easier to eat than like tree bark. It's like, well, tree bark, what? But a berry, that makes sense. So schizandra is very high in shikimate, and it's relative. It's in the schizandra family is star anise. I got into growing star anises in Texas, actually, as a result of the whole pandemic, and that's another silver lining of the whole thing. So that's one on my list. And fennel seed, and fennel is also a great source of shikimic acid or shikimate. Another really good source of shikimic acid and shikimate, and just something that I really like, and another really good anti-COVID and anti-jab substance is carrots. So carrot juice and then dandelion leaf, and those two together, good combination. Great if you're into juicing. Those two are really fun to do together. And there was a great article that was written in, it was one of these scientific magazines about it interferes with the ACE2 receptor. So if you have dandelion in your body, it disturbs the COVID and the spike protein's ability to attach to the ACE2 receptor. That was dandelion. And there's some other things that have that effect. Cordyceps affects the ACE2 receptor and blocks the ACE2 receptor from picking up the spike protein. And so if you're herbal and you're like, oh, wait, okay, so like Chinese herbs, schizandra and cordyceps, look at that. They're very powerful. A very good combination, too.
Another example of an herb that could be very helpful here is licorice root, which contains a very potent molecule called glycyrrhizin. Now, glycyrrhizin not only protects the liver from damage caused by alcohol or acetaminophen, over-the-counter painkillers, glycyrrhizin also can help prevent the formation of clots in the body. These clots are killing people, and we have a possible solution to these clots, at least in some people. Nattokinase could play a helpful role.
And there was a peer-reviewed study recently that affirmed that nattokinase has the ability to basically neutralize the spike protein, which is, of course, implicated in all of these various cardiovascular issues. So I do think it's a worthwhile thing to pursue. And it comes from a Japanese fruit, natto, which is a fermented soybean. And soy is already known to have so many other benefits based on the research I've done. So, it's always a beautiful thing to be able to extract from a food something that could have a life-saving effect.
But again, the public is not allowed to know any of this, even though the science is already published on this. You can look this up on PubMed, National Library of Medicine, hosted by the United States government. The science is all there. You're just not supposed to know about it.
My mom was a nurse, my sister was a nurse, and I pretty much trusted anything medical. And, we'd start our seasons and we'd take the flu shot and we would do, basically whatever they said. Yeah, let's just do it. Let's start the season. That's how our focus was. Over time, I ate cheeseburgers every day. And I still love cheeseburgers, by the way, but I have learned to eat better. And then you sit there and you go on a regimen where you improve your vegetables. You start eating a lot of vegetables and you find out over time that, glyphosate and other chemicals and pesticides in the vegetables, if you put that in a big smoothie, now you're getting a concentrated version of those chemicals. So even eating vegetables doesn't just kind of save you, and you have to look for organic. And there's some challenges to that, but at least you've got a chance to get good nutrient that where your body recognizes it as food and whatnot. Then I also learned about supplementation. I know our this took many years of going through it and seeing what simple vitamin Z, vitamin D, minerals, essential fatty acids. Fat was just banned as I was growing. Nobody eats anything fat. And I think with all these products, no matter what you're eating, you've got to get the great raw materials. So if you're getting vitamin C from plants and you want to make sure they're highest quality organic plants, you want to make sure that they're not sprayed with glyphosate, amongst other things. So those raw materials are key to everything we're eating. And that's, again, taken a long time for me to understand that, but it's really obvious to me now.
Nutrition is the answer to eliminating the need for dangerous vaccines that are killing and maiming children and adults all over the world right now. But of course, the vaccine industry doesn't manufacture nutritional supplements. They're not into nutrition. They can only sell you on their jabs, so they ignore nutrition. They don't want you to have any good nutrition. They just want to jab you and jab you and jab your children until you're so sickened that you need more jabs and more medications and more chemotherapy. It's a racket. It's a giant, corrupt, criminal system of keeping people sick in order to extract profits from their suffering. This is like a case of the emperor has no clothes. So we're watching the vaccine emperor and saying, whoa, the guy's naked. And the vaccine industry is saying, how dare you say that about the emperor? You should imagine these things are there and that they're working and that they're efficacious like all the other people are imagining it. And people like myself and others in this space, we refuse to bow down to the delusion. We say, no, the vaccine emperor is naked. The facade has been shattered.
Yes, the vaccine facade has been shattered. People across the globe are waking up, and there's nothing they can do to stop us because we are the 99%, and they know it.
Imagine there was an elephant, and you wanted the elephant to go up the hill, and it didn't want to go. You're going to have a problem. You're going to have to get a problem. I don't care. You got 50 people trying to push an elephant up the hill who sat down. That's what we are. We are the 99%. We are that elephant, and they can't push us up the hill unless we walk. I'm just saying. Say no to everything.
We have to all have a great awakening. We have to have a great awakening. Then once you have that great awakening, you got to be able to walk through the fear of the unknown. You can't be scared of that. You have to utilize your voice, make it loud and proud, and call out all of these evildoers, all of these demonic imbeciles that have infiltrated our system. You can't be scared to call them out. People would try to pay you money to shut up or go away. But guess what? If you don't speak out about it, either way it goes, you're going to go away. Because what is their true intent? So I would like to say to everybody, you have a voice. Your voice is your power. Use it. That's what you're going to have to do. We have to come together collectively together. It's not about black, white, pinstripe, polka dot, or plaid. It's not about left wing, right wing, or in between. It's about us being human beings, American citizens. And if we are American citizens, the land of the free, the home of the brave, we are not slaves. Don't allow these people to enslave us.
We need to restore credibility to our public institutions, number one. And that's where unity will begin coming back. And we'll begin again being able to, focus on the issues, the values that we agree upon, that we share in common, rather than focusing entirely on the issues that divide us.
We look out into the world and we perceive the world in the way that we were taught by television, in the way that we were taught by pharma, in the way that we were taught in elementary school, in the way that we were taught by scientism. And what I'm asking everyone to do is just get into that beautiful, godly, innocent perception, and to go out and just try to perceive things innocently as if you'd never been taught anything by anybody, and to just perceive how glorious this creation is. This is the greatest, most amazing discovery to deprogram us from all this stuff that we think is above us or below our feet or happened before we were born or after we died. Just deprogram all that scientism BS and just perceive it innocently, and you will come to touch God's great energy. You will come to feel it. I was feeling it yesterday. I was standing out here. That's why I'm sharing this message. I was standing out here in the front of the house, and we're up on a ridge, so when we're right over the Great Lakes, so the weather comes right at us from the north wind, hits us directly, and sometimes we'll have cloud formation right above. We're in it. I was in the zone where raindrops were being formed yesterday. They were accreting and just appearing right around me. I was in the zone where it was happening. I was like, this is so amazing. This is so outrageous. I mean, I'm getting chills about it. I was trying to film it. I was like, can you guys see this? It's hard to relate it, but that's the glory of innocent perception. And with that, every day will be the best day ever.
Yes, best day ever. Please share this docuseries with all of your friends and family. They need this information. That's why we created Remedy, because you deserve the truth, and we want you to have the best day ever. There's nothing more valuable than your health. And if you know the truth, you can be healthy. But the censorship industrial complex doesn't want you to know your options. They want to keep you ignorant and subservient. They want to keep us all dependent on Big Pharma's vaccines and drugs.
So let's collectively tell them to go pound sand. We know that you have friends and family that need this information. That's why when you choose to own the Hero package of Remedy, we're going to give you 5 additional thumb drives or DVDs, your choice, absolutely free, so you can give them their own copy of this docuseries.
So just click the button below and take advantage of this special offer. Thanks in advance for your support. We couldn't do this without you.
We'll see you tomorrow for episode number 2 as we bust some more vaccine myths, discover the truth about the polio vaccine, learn some disturbing information about COVID-19 and the injections, and, of course, provide you with more life-saving remedies. Here's a brief preview.
The vaccine agenda is nothing more than a massive global experiment, and they're tracking what their toxins and venoms and poisons are doing in your body to create what diseases, so they can create new drugs to sell you for the rest of your life. That's the entire vaccine agenda. It's all one big experiment.
Vaccines are classified for tort liability purposes as unavoidably unsafe.
There is literally no liability associated with it. When you look at the 1986 National Child Vaccine Injury Act, and you look at then the Brucewitz versus Wyeth decision in 2011, it is impossible to sue a vaccine manufacturer for an injury.
If you are a physician and you are following a public health diktat or a standard of care that comes down from a government agency that is not in the best interest of your patient, this is a conflict of interest.
So we have a situation here where there's conflict of interest. These medical associations cannot possibly interpret information with fair balance because so much money has been given to them that tips the scale and tips their opinion in favor of mass vaccination.
So it is a conflict of interest inherent in many of these medical facilities and associations to promote vaccination because they profit directly and indirectly from it.
And they're free. You go get these shots for free to keep you safe, or you can trust Ty and John and go get some vitamin C, vitamin D, some zinc, maybe some ozone, hydrogen peroxide, but it's all out of your pocket. It doesn't cost you anything because insurance won't pay for any of that.
Can we look at the, for example, the FDA's PowerPoint they released before the vaccine showing they were looking for 20-something signals of, serious side effects through post-marketing surveillance, including death. When we point these things out, that should be celebrated as, okay, wow, we're actually practicing medicine ethically, but instead we're being characterized as enemies of the state, literally.
FDA gets 50% of its budget from the pharmaceutical industry in exchange for fast-tracking vaccines or other drugs.
The FDA needs to go away.
The FDA needs to go away. It's quicker than any other organization. Remember, the third leading cause of death in 2019, when they killed my mom, was iatrogenic medicine.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of iatrogenic injury from those vaccines, especially in our youth.
When we see a cardiac arrest at the college and pro level, the first thing we think of now is COVID-19 vaccination and myocarditis.
It's not normal for children to have myocarditis. It's not normal for teenagers to be dropping dead of myocardial infarction while playing sports.
We now have over 200 peer-reviewed manuscripts describing COVID-19 vaccine-induced myocarditis or heart damage. The majority are in the pediatric and adolescent age group. Peak age is 18 to 24.
The polio story is very interesting. My mom grew up in that era of, watching the iron lung images on the black boob tube, the little TVs, and the horrific messaging they were able to get across to scare the population to line up for the polio. Actually, it was the oral polio back then.
The government purported that these vaccines were perfectly safe. And of course, it was discovered later on that this approximately 10-year window of vaccine production was contaminated with a virus called SV40, simian for monkey, SV40 contamination. And there are studies that link that SV40 contamination to different forms of cancer.
The polio vaccines always have caused polio.
It's not the wild virus. It's not polio wild virus, but they're actually getting vaccine-induced polio.
Everyone has seen the videos of these trucks going through neighborhoods spraying kids in the community pools, spraying kids eating lunch at school. I mean, they literally sprayed this right on them.
And the symptoms of DDT poisoning were identical to the symptoms of polio.
Kids that had any symptoms from DDT spraying on them, they were immediately stamped as having polio.
So after the polio vaccines came out, the CDC changed the definition of polio to make it appear that fewer people had polio.
The year after India was declared polio-free, there were more than 50,000 cases of non-polio acute flaccid paralysis.
The only substance that's been described to dissolve the spike protein is a Japanese discovery called nattokinase. And nattokinase is a fibrinolytic enzyme, a proteolytic enzyme produced by Bacillus subtilis natto.
Natto stimulates plasminogen. So it breaks it down naturally. In other words, it stimulates the body to do it naturally. Now this is published. It's in the journal Molecules, September of 22, degradative effects of nattokinase on spike protein of SARS-2.
Everything from vitamin D, vitamin C, all the way to hyperbaric oxygen treatment, nattokinase.
Enzymes as a remedy is really important, and I really like serrapeptase and nattokinase and other enzymes, the normal enzymes, the proteolytic enzymes, the bromelain, which is a type of proteolytic enzyme.
Things like papain and bromelain. Viruses are toxic proteins. Therefore, you have to enable your body to produce the proteolytic enzymes it needs to break those down, or you have to add proteolytic enzymes to your system.
Ozonated, it's been turned from O2 to O3 and O4 and O5, O6, O7, O8, O9, O10, O11, O12, O13. And then that goes into olive oil, which sucks up the more aggressive O3, O4, O5, O6, but allows the O7 and above to come through so I can breathe it.
For those people who think that we are losing and everything is in a state of despair and despondency, no.
Be brave. Walk through the fear of the unknown and know that God's got this. God will prevail.